Hello there, and welcome to another DPA Facebook live stream. My name is Matt Wanless. I'm from the UK arm of DPA Sound Network, and today we're trying something a little bit different. This is the first time we'll have two guests on the stream with us, and we've gone for a kind of a broad spectrum here. We've got one person who's kind of just sort of coming into the audio industry, has been in there for a couple of years, and one who has been around so long that there might as well be a statue. But yes, we've got Jessica Edkins,
Hey.
who's here. She's a graduate of the Bristol Old Vic theatre course and has been in the industry for a few years, worked on The Nature of Why with our other guest, and is now a live event technician at SLX, worked on the Thriller Live tour, and is, carving out a niche.
Hey.
Welcome, Jessica. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And at the other end of the spectrum, we have Simon Honywill, who's been around in the industry for some 35 years, has trouble staying awake on live streams, and seems to have done loads of work with the Queen. I was looking at your website, Simon, and you worked on the Golden Jubilee celebrations at her wedding anniversary, the opening of the Thames Barrier. Do you have a special relationship with Her Majesty?
No, but I'm a bit disappointed that I've not been on the honours list yet.
That's a good point. But Simon does have a nice ring to it.
I'm not sure about the statue, though. They're not very popular these days, are they, statues?
It depends if you've been a good boy, son. Simon is a DPA master and a stalwart user of DPA microphones. You've been using our stuff for a long time, right?
I have. Right from I was kind of converted from the very early days of trying to make orchestras louder, and when the 4060 came along, it was a bit of a revelation.
And
that was it was a game changer.
So that was when you first began. I should say also that Simon and Jessica will be taking questions, so please get them in early. Just chuck them into the chat, and my colleague Sam is in our office in London and monitoring the situation, and we'll be in touch whenever there are questions to be answered. But yeah, we use DPA as a jumping off point, but then as always we'll just spread out into the various different facets of the audio industry. But we thought we'd start with the project where the two of you met, which was The Nature of Why, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was part of Mayfest in Bristol, in the centre of Bristol, and we were at the Bristol Old Vic.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the project, what it sort of entailed?
Shall I start?
Yeah, you go with it.
So I was aware of the British Para Orchestra. In fact, I'd done a show with them in Bristol. The British Para Orchestra is a fairly spectacular organisation set up by Charlie Hazelwood, who's their artistic director, and he was very aware that there were no real opportunities for disabled musicians to get to work professionally. Seriously, you look at an orchestra, and the chances of there being somebody in a chair or sight impeded or whatever within that orchestra is highly unlikely that you'll see them. But so Charlie started this, and it's been a meteoric kind of rise to recognition and notoriety for all kinds of reasons. But what they strive to do is present orchestral, for want of a better word, music in new and innovative ways. And they've been reinterpreting various pieces. Charlie's a big fan of the whole minimalism thing, Steve Reich, Philip Glass, all that kind of stuff. But they so they've been performing existing pieces for some time, but the time came for them to have a specially commissioned piece, which was going to be a showcase for them to not only show off what they do, but obviously secure things like funding and from the Arts Council, etc. And the at the time, this was back in 2017, early 2018. I was working with Goldfrapp. I was mixing Goldfrapp for a house, and the part of the I mean, people think of Goldfrapp, they think of Alison as the front person, this dynamic, wacky, amazing vocalist. But her partner in crime is Will Gregory, who has a long history of working with the likes of Tears for Fears and Peter Gabriel, and he's been doing his own musical projects for some time. He has a Moog ensemble who he takes out and works with occasionally. But Will was approached to basically write the music for this piece. And in doing so, he sort of created the foundation for it and gave it the name, The Nature of Why. And Will asked me to be the sound designer, which was fantastic. It was an amazing opportunity for which I will be ever grateful to him for. But the show is it's a totally immersive piece. So the audience, the dancers, and the musicians are all in the same space, which is a sort of 15-meter circle. There are 9 musicians, an 11-piece string section, 5 dancers.
Is it?
Isn't
it 4? I think it's 4.
4 dancers. And the piece is structured around a series of extracts from an interview by the American theoretical physicist Richard Feynman, who, if you know Feynman, is an incredible character. He's larger than life and amazingly sort of effusive about his topic. And he's been asked by a hapless interviewer to explain the question why. And he goes off on these extraordinary tangents, digging into the depth of this question, why. And Will wrote 9 pieces of music around sections from this interview. So the show consists of a bit of playback of Feynman talking about his thing, and then we move into a movement of music. And I've completely forgotten what it was you asked me about now. See, I'm already really excited because it's such an amazing
I was just
show.
asking about the show, so this is all valuable information. But let's get more specifically onto the sound design, because when you were telling me about it, it sounded troubling, difficult, and kind of wonderful as well.
All of the above, yeah. So I was. I wonder if you can hear our local ice cream.
I certainly can.
So I was brought in at a really early stage of development, and Will had only written bits and pieces of the music, and they were trying to figure out how to make the show actually work. And it was really exciting because it's not that often that you get involved in something, unless you're in West End or whatever, that you get involved in something that early on. And the initial plan was that the musicians would be static pretty much, but divided in 2 with a space in between them. And the action would all take place in that space. And I kind of thought, well, this is unconventional. And then, then they said, oh, but this is where the audience is going to be as well. And I'm going, what? You can't do that, mate. And it turned into essentially being this. The show's really, it's like a hemisphere. There's the plane on which the action takes place, which, like I said, is a sort of 15-meter circle, a 15-meter diameter circle.
The only way I can really describe it to you is completely blurring the lines between audience, musician, and able-bodied and disabled as such. Just trying to make sure that you understand as you walk into this bubble that's been created that everyone is the same inside of here. There is no difference between anyone there. You're either watching it, but actually you're part of it.
Yeah, you talked about an acoustic bubble when you were describing it to me before. What did that mean?
Well, the right from the very beginning, the idea was not to amplify the thing, but to give it space and depth. Because everybody's, pretty up close. I mean, there are some instruments, there's a keyboard and a few other things that might have no real acoustic sound. But what I kind of ended up deciding to do was create an acoustic environment into which the audience and the band and the dancers all process at the beginning of the show. It normally takes place on a stage rather than in an auditorium, so it's everybody's in the same space anyway. They start elsewhere and process into to a rhythm and a tune that the musicians are singing. And I wanted to create this sense of entering a different acoustic space. So it's a bit like kind of using electronically forced acoustics in concert halls. But
it's go on. I just think you kind of made that happen as well, because the audience have come into a dead space, which is the stage, which normally when an audience comes in to see a piece, you get taken into the auditorium. You're sat in your seats, whereas you're kind of brought onto the stage. It's quiet. There's nothing happening at all. You're just there looking at the space, looking at the rigging. You can see the microphones, you can see the speakers, you see where all the lights are. You're looking around, and then you hear the noise. And as the procession moves into the space with you, it obviously becomes bigger, and that's when your bubble's formed around the audience and the band type thing.
So the space is mic'd with overhead mics. There are 12 4011s. There's two ORTF pairs in the center, literally dead center of the space. And then around that, there are 8 very evenly spaced 4011s. And each one of those capsules is routed into the system according to its relationship with its nearest loudspeaker. So there are 7 loudspeakers. If you took the 8 cardinal points of a compass and removed south for the sake of argument, that's where the orchestra is. The orchestra stays most of the time. Yeah, the string section.
Yeah.
So there's no loudspeaker there, but there are 7 more spaced around the performance space, and the microphones hang over the top and they're routed according to where they are in relation to the loudspeakers, which obviously creates potential issues with things like gain before feedback and that kind of stuff. And one of the things that was really, really crucial was I had to be absolutely certain that those microphones were all as similar as possibly could be. So in their response and sensitivity, in order to be able to control that threshold of feedback, I couldn't have any mics which were slightly out, because obviously they would upset the equilibrium of the sound field.
Yeah, if you've got a lift in one of them at a certain frequency, it's going to throw everything off. Yeah, exactly
that. And the other thing, of course, is the loudspeakers likewise have to be extremely similar in their response, and the positioning of them is really crucial.
What did you use actually for PA?
Well, I've not yet been able to do it with the PA that I actually specified.
Nope.
What I specified, those of you who know me won't be surprised, but I specified Martin Audio's CDD Live loudspeakers, which are they're a very controlled but very broad directional coaxial loudspeaker. But I've ended up using.
We've had all sorts, haven't we?
Loudspeakers made by other manufacturers.
Yeah. Okay.
But what I have done is used. I have a device called a Trinov ST2 optimizer, which I use and that guarantees me that the frequency response, the phase response, and the impulse that the loudspeakers are actually producing are all really precisely aligned.
Right. Okay. And The performers who were on the stage, were they purely there as dancers, or were they speaking and singing as well? Or
Jess can do this bit.
So you've got your dancers, and then you also have all of your musicians and 2 singers, which are all on RF. So they're within the space, moving around, so free moving. So there's a horn player in a wheelchair, which obviously on RF. We have double bass. Did we have guitar? Yeah, we had guitar free moving as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
and were you mixing the show, Jess?
No, I wasn't mixing. I was the one going around chasing after them, checking that their microphones were working at all times. Because when you end up with 250 people in the space with your 6 music performers, and the performers are rolling around over the place, so your mics are moving. You've got to always be finding them to check the problem straight away while Simon's mixing in one position. So I also became his eyes. So when there was more people in the space and he couldn't see the performance, I'd let him know where they were so he could put them in the right place in the mix, in the bubble.
Yeah, so we don't have any fancy performer tracking systems.
That's me.
Yeah, but I also we use a Yamaha CL5 for the show, and I use the 5.1 bus topology, which I've kind of bodged into 7.1, and you can, on an iPad, you can literally follow people around within the sound field with that, and very often I'll go into the audience with the iPad and move the performers around as and when required.
Right, I see.
For each of the 9 pieces, they tend to be in a pretty kind of set position. They'll move in between, and some of them will. I mean, there's a marimba, for instance, huge marimba which kind of spins around and things. But most of the time they're relatively static during each movement.
But it also changed though regarding where the audience was positioned, because during each performance was quite different in a way as well. Because if the audience were situated in a certain place, they had to move slightly, or it's forever moving. It's kind of individual to each performance. No 2 performances were the same, as in feeling and placement.
And what challenges does this kind of unpredictability from a show create for you as a designer?
Well, it's really it's really being able to get a handle on where everybody is, because there are sort of blocks and things scattered around that people can stand on, but for instance, Guy, the horn player who's in a chair, it's really hard to know where he is a lot of the time because you can't see him. So okay. The show can't afford black tracks or anything like that. So we have to make do without it. And so it's important to understand where people are. And there are sections where the 2 sopranos are lying down or rolling around on the floor.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of, they tend to do that in the same kind of place each time. But it's difficult.
That's one of the things that I found interesting as being the mic tech during the performance was it was always they start outside of the space as well. So you've tested the mics, they all go outside, so you've lost everything before the show even begins. So you've got nothing. You've got all of like the bits that it picks up, and then all of a sudden they come into space, you start getting things, but obviously you're trying to listen to them. Then you need to be in the space to check the positioning, that everything's still going all right. So it's just constantly trying to, you can't really be sat at the racks and be in there at the same time. So it's like, if it's going to go wrong, how are we going to sort this? So it's just carrying around microphones with us, ready for a live mic change in front of 40 people watching you, which did happen.
Well, one of the things though is which I find really interesting about this show, is particularly with certain members of the cast, the level of trust that we have to develop with them. You know, if they're partially sighted, you have, or whatever, you have to approach them in such a way. It's not like, oh, hi, I'm just going to come. You know, excuse me, time to put your mic on. It's like, you know, you have to make sure that they know you're there. They have to know where you are. They have to know who you are, and have to know exactly what it is that you want to achieve. With micing them up. So that's why it's important to have somebody with the good manners and human skills that Jess has.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it's like, go on,
sorry, Jess. No,
I was only saying about you were saying about the mic placement and things like going up during a performance. It's not, you can't go, hi guys, hi, you've got a problem with your mic. You have to go, especially with the partially sighted, you've got to go and like do my touch and things like that during the show. Trying to work out how to say that.
Well, with someone like Takashi, for instance, Takashi's a viola player.
Yeah.
He's very sort of serene Japanese fella who's been blind from birth. He's the most astonishingly beautiful player. Absolutely incredible. But I mean, he's very kind of, I mean, you could never get Takashi excited about anything except craft beer, which is marvelous. But he, you know, with Takashi, he's this very kind of like this serene, quiet gentleman, and you know, you feel like, I don't know how you feel, Jess, necessarily, but you know, you kind of feel like, if you're not careful, you feel like you're invading his space, and particularly when he's performing, because he's relying on essentially usually the dancers to help him move around through the audience. If he stood there on his own, you kind of think, well, if I go up and tap him on the shoulder, is it gonna scare him to death?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I mean, that aspect of it is kind of unusual.
And how prepared for that were you from the course that you did, Jess? I mean, obviously this is an exceptional circumstance where you're working with people of varying physical capabilities, but like how much of it do you pick up on the job as to how much you learnt in theory?
Well, the Bristol Vic Theatre School was a brilliant place to learn. General all-rounder, so we learned everything we needed to know on the basics, like you said, in theory. But really, you do pick it all up out on the job. So the years of me going out into the world, I kind of knew what I needed to do, but obviously it's different every day, and the problems that you face, you can kind of replicate them in theory, but not when you're out on a show and something goes terribly wrong. That's when you're learning. So that kind of answer what you want?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so, what was your actual title on the show?
Simon named me the sound design assistant, but I felt more of I'm more of a radio mic tech and assistant as well.
Yeah, because it sort of differs. I mean, obviously, it's, you know, touring theatre and smaller venues and kind of moving from place to place. So it doesn't sound like it's got the conventional setup of a designer associate 1, 2, 3, that kind of thing. Much more kind of active. And you were mixing the show yourself, were you, Sam?
Yeah. It's I think it's one of those things that it kind of had to happen really by default, because to actually get a design together and get someone engaged with the way that it had to work, and also, I mean, technically, with sort of finding that fine balance between the overhead microphones and the loudspeaker system in the time that we had, wasn't really practical, and from the point of view of the Power Orchestra too, their budget wouldn't really allow for it. So
it is very much one of them shows as well that you knew what. I watched you mix that show every day, and every day it just blew my mind what you was doing. So having somebody come in, like if you tried to teach me how to mix it, it'd never be the same as how you would have, because it'd be how you felt it. So for you to be the designer and mixing it, for me, it felt like it became your show then. You know what I mean?
It also, I mean, there are plenty of other stories behind this statement, but also throughout my career, that's a lot of the time how it's worked. I've been quite kind of fortunate from that point of view, to be given the opportunity to do the system design and specification and mix the gig, and that gives you a connection with everything that I think is really important. But sometimes it's just not possible.
Yeah.
You know, the scale.
Yeah, and you like that side of things. Do you like to be there day in, day out kind of thing?
Well, not anymore. But no, I mean, I'm now very particular about how I choose to do certain things and which equipment I choose to do it with, because I know that if I go into a field with 100,000 people in them, I know it's going to work. Or if I go into a theatre with an audience of 300 and people rolling around on the floor, I've got an idea that it might work.
Yeah.
So it's like anything. You kind of, I mean, I'm still a sucker for new ideas and new methodologies and finding new ways of approaching things, because I like to be a bit maverick about it, I suppose. And that kind of, you know, I like to kind of throw the rule book out the window, which I had to do with this show. And that's what keeps me interested, really, I suppose. And that, yeah, the whole sort of design and operator. I mean, it's the same with the War of the Worlds. I mean, it's a bit more conventional, a bit. That's a much bigger show, but you know, I was the sound designer and the front of house mixer, so yeah. I mean, it's a way that I've nearly. I mean, there have been times when that's not really been clear as to who's responsible for what, and it's been a disaster. You know, going back a bit, but when people kind of expect you just to sort of slot into the way they work, and you're thinking that the way you work is the way everybody works, it can go horribly wrong.
We had Richard Brooker on here a few weeks ago. I don't know if you know Richard. He's a sound designer as well. He's a lot of theatre and West End stuff. But one of the things that came out of that conversation, I was just really fascinated by the relationship between the designer and the team working underneath them. And obviously this one was a smaller team. And how the two of you first, like how you ended up getting the gig, and obviously the two of you become friends from there. And like the fact that you're both in such different places in your career is just this is an interesting relationship, and I'm just curious to hear more about it.
Well, when we first did this particular show in the old Vic, which was May 2018, wasn't it?
Yeah, was it? 2018 it would have been. Was it? Yeah.
I think it must have been.
Don't know. I'll go by so quick now.
I had I had this idea of how it was going to work, and we were presented with the crew and equipment that the old Vic were going to provide. The microphones I insisted on, you'll be glad to hear.
Yes.
Because for that very reason, I knew that I could rely on them.
Yeah.
To give me what I needed. The loudspeaker system and the optimization of that system was a bit more haphazard because I hadn't introduced my Trinov into the big picture at that time, so it took a lot longer. So, you know, it takes half a day or more to tune the system conventionally, whereas it takes about 10 minutes with the Trinov.
Yeah, we kind of stood in the middle of that circle of speakers, didn't we, on the first day with Duncan, who's the head of sound at the Bristol Vic, and was like, how are we going to make this all sing nicely together?
Yeah, because loudspeakers, when you're in it, when it comes down to the critical sort of, things like thresholds of feedback, and I hold my hands up, it has fed back this show.
Yes.
Quite spectacularly on a couple of occasions. But when it comes to that, like we said, the loudspeakers are, no two loudspeakers have the same frequency response. But what people work really hard, Duncan and everybody else at the Elvit work really hard to help us get this together. But Jess, I
was a casual at the Bristol Vic at the time, so I came in during the rehearsals and sat in the rehearsal room because I knew I was going to be. Obviously, we didn't really know how the show was going to work. It was the first time properly putting it out. So I went a week prior and sat in there with them and played the Q Lab and tried to help build that before we got in, so that I had a kind of idea and Simon had an idea. But at the time, we didn't know that I was going to actually be coming with you guys as such, because I was just coming in to help with the entire setup of the show and get it working.
Yeah, I mean, I was at fault for not perhaps stipulating from the very beginning that I needed somebody with me. I didn't really know, to be honest.
No.
But I mean, Jess just struck a chord, as people do. I just thought, this person wants to help. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's enthusiastic, she's funny, and she buys the beers. So it was a perfect fit.
Win-win. Yeah.
And she makes a blinding cup of tea as well.
I am an Northerner. I'm going to put that on my CV,
Yeah. It's very valuable skill. Very, very valuable. Yes. And so many people fuck it up as well.
Yeah. So I mean, but then following that, where there have been shows where we've taken it elsewhere, and Jess hasn't been a part of the crew. It's been hard work. It's been because you have to go through the whole process. No matter how good the specification is, you've got to go through the whole process of explaining to everybody what it is you're trying to achieve, and how important it is that the loudspeakers are all exactly the same height. They're all got exactly the same amount of tilt on them, and the microphones are all exactly the same height. And because it's like, oh, it's about a foot over there, mate. Is that all right? No, it's not.
Yeah, we've worked well as a team as well. I noticed when we took it on tour last year, in the sense that I'll come in and ask that Simon's all right, and then I'll make sure that all the mics are working and all talking and all that's plugged in and it's ready to go for when the singers come in. So he just has to forget about that. Then it is just you tuning your system, which is great. And then we talk to each other just as we're about to go up and go, everything going okay? And we're like, yeah, right, well, let's do this. And it's brilliant.
Yeah, it is. Everything just clicks into place and it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this gig sounds very different from a lot of what the rest of your career has been in particular. Well, not necessarily very different from it, but like, obviously you spend a lot of time out on tour with Goldfrapp and working on stuff like Glastonbury. And how do you approach those two different things?
With an open mind and a sense of humour. Well, I was fortunate to be schooled in my early days at RG Jones Sound Engineering, and to this day, RGs are not like an awful lot of other sound companies in that they do. They're not a traditional rock and roll touring sound company. They're not an SSE. They're not. They're not an autograph. They're a bit of everything. And I was, and that is a great way to learn, because I had to deal with all kinds of different situations. Really from the word go. and I was literally just thrown into things a lot of the time. And with absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. But I kind of grew up. I joined at the age of 19 or 20 in 1979, and I grew up with that whole ethic of Jess has disappeared.
Yeah, we'll get her back. Don't worry. Carry on.
I grew up with that whole ethic of, just here's the job, go and do it, get on with it. And I suppose when it came to things like music, whilst I was a sort of quasi musician myself, the whole thrust of RG's musical sort of portfolio was very largely orchestral. RGs were really right at the very beginning of that whole open air classical concert thing, where the popularity of all that stuff exploded in the 80s, the sort of latter half of the 80s through the 90s, and by the end of the 90s, everybody with a bit of a garden was having a picnic concert in it, and but RGs were very much involved in the very early stages of that. So
kind of brings us back to what we started talking about, which was you discovering 4060s and 4061s on orchestras. And was that early in? I mean, I guess this is a little bit later down the line, but
yeah. Well, when I first started working with orchestras, most of the shows I was involved in were either at Kenwood Concert Bowl on Hampstead Heath, and we'd do 10 shows every summer there, and alongside that there were others, Crystal Palace Concert Bowl, Marble Hill House, and a few others, and Leeds Castle in Kent, not Leeds like the truck driver once thought. And the audiences for these things were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the systems that we were providing were becoming more and more inadequate every year. And I kind of was realizing that this, we had to kind of change things up. And no matter how many, the whole process was obviously done all very much with overhead microphones initially and space microphones, and very often very few of them. Like half a dozen AKG D190s or something like that.
Okay.
Other microphones are available.
Yes, indeed.
But the game before feedback and everything was always, you could get it to sound great, but whether or not it was loud enough to get to the back of a 16,000 strong audience was a different matter, especially if they were all drunk, as they usually are at Leeds Castle. And also the concept of sort of orchestral dynamics, where the quiet bits can be really quiet, and in places like Kenwood, you've got in those days Concorde flying over and stuff like that, which really helped. And I was forever, I suppose, almost without realizing it, first of all, finding ways of getting microphones closer to musicians, and without them getting in their way. And with overheads and things, we'd find all kinds of places and positions to put them where, if somebody's bowing a violin or whatever, it's not going to get in their way, or a cello, and actually achieving it quite successfully. And you learn a lot about how microphones work and their polar patterns and how sensitive they are to, positioning in many cases. But if really what we're talking about is how the DPA thing came along, obviously I was aware of Brühl and Kerr, back in those days, and aware of the fact that they were kind of the benchmark when it came to high-end condenser microphones. And there was a show that I was brought in to mix at Wembley Stadium in 1997, I think, called Songs and Visions. I was brought in by Brit Rowe to mix this gig, and it was a kind of a multi-artist show, which was a kind of a history of pop music. And they had the most incredible house band, amazing, just the best possible session musicians you could ever imagine, and a small orchestra, and people like Seal, John Bon Jovi, Rod Stewart, Chaka Khan, Katie Lang, Mary J. Blige, all of these people singing the tunes. And we spent probably a month, well, it might have been less, I don't know, but at Olympic Studios in Barnes, rehearsing this. And in the studio was a guy called Greg Jackman, an engineer called Greg Jackman, who was going to be responsible for recording the gig. And he and I would sit down and think about how we were going to achieve this. And I can't quite remember, but there were some microphones around in the early days, around about that time, which they're a bit of a homemade thing, but they've clipped onto the instruments, onto the violins and violas, but sounded terrible. And I can't remember, but we were discussing using these things, and I've just remembered the name, but I won't mention it. And Greg came up with the idea of basically using that kind of that kind of clip-on kind of thing, but using, I think it must have been DPAs. It must have been the early days of the miniature microphones. And basically he got some rubber bands and a coat hanger and got the microphone right there on the instrument. And it sounded a whole world away from what it was we were doing with the other stuff. And we knew that we were going to be able to get a decent amount of level out of it. And so that's kind of how that whole association and that whole, orchestras with, 40 DPAs across the violins and violas and whatever all came about. Because very soon after that, I was using these. I was insisting on using these on all of the orchestral shows that I was doing with RGs and other people as well. And it all kind of exploded from there.
Right. Okay.
That sounded like a very long-winded answer.
No, don't worry. These stories always have deep roots. But have you? Because we had Phil Wright on a couple of weeks ago, and Phil has sort of shifted over when he's doing large-scale orchestral stuff to using 4099s, particularly for core 4099s. Do you do that as well now, or are you still on the 61s?
Well, a lot of the problems, and here's the thing, right? I've got into terrible trouble using 4099s on priceless instruments. And there was
yeah. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, there was a whole, the thing about a lot of the orchestras who are playing these kinds of shows these days is that they know this is going to happen. There she is. She's back.
Jessica's back.
Had the black screen of death.
They know they're going to be close mic'd, and there was an incident, I think, on Classical Spectacular in the Royal Albert Hall, where a viola player with the RPO was insistent that a 4099 had damaged her instrument, and the whole thing was really difficult to really know entirely whether it was the microphone or not. But a lot of them will refuse to use 4099s. Now, working with people like Catherine Jenkins and stuff like that, it's a different kind of, and War of the Worlds, that's all 4099s, all of it. The whole string section on War of the Worlds is all 99s. Without, the more kind of pop orientated stuff, you can do it. But when you're dealing with strictly orchestral music, a lot of the players are really canny to what's going on, and they don't like 99s on their instruments. Well,
Yeah.
certainly the violas and violin players don't.
Well, this is why I reacted the way I did when you first started talking about it, because we were talking with Phil specifically about him for the first time in his career managing to get the RPO to use 4099s, and it was largely down to a demonstration video that the guys in Denmark made showing exactly how it's supposed to clamp on with a violin mount, and suddenly that seemed to make all the difference. And hallelujah! But so you would if you could, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can do a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I would always choose that over a 61, generally. But yeah, it's also availability, because a lot of the time, all of these events, a lot of them happen in summertime, and there's loads of orchestras playing in loads of parks all over the place, and everybody wants to use DPAs. And
curse them. Yeah.
It's just I can't imagine why. But yeah, I mean, always on the the cellos and basses are 99. Sometimes I don't know. You don't often get as much choice as perhaps you might like when it comes to that, purely down to stock availability and things.
Well, we have a question which is purely about choice, I believe. Sam is there. There he is.
Hello. Yes. Hi. So we've had a question in from a chap, Ian. If you had a desert island microphone that you had to use for every instrument, what would you use? Which sounds like you've just answered that question, Simon. I think.
Well, the thing about a 99 is, as long as you've got a clip for everything, there's not much you can't do. However, the one thing I never actually got to play with were the large capsule kind of version of that. I've never actually really had a chance to have a go with that. And I think maybe that might be the ultimate microphone, would be a large capsule. I don't know. But yeah, 99 would be...
like the 19mm 4011s or 4018s on the gooseneck.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be a very interesting thing to have a go at. But
Name
yeah,
the time
99.
That's a hint.
99 with a full set.
That's a hint there.
99 with a full set of clips.
Yeah.
So all the magnetic ones, not to be much to stick them to on a desert island, but
You've got to make your own clips out of the palm trees.
And as long as I can have my mobile phone and this.
Yeah. Yeah. Why don't we, now we've got Jess back.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Don't worry, not at all. Why don't we? Because you were talking before about wanting to talk about people at your end of the industry working with people at Jess's end of the industry, and how that can create the, secure the future of the industry and getting the right people through and into the right places and opportunities.
So sorry, was that sorry? You talking to me or Jess there?
Either or. I mean, it was a subject that you brought up in our preamble, and I'm curious to hear what you wanted to.
Well, I'll just kick it off with this. In 2006, with my good buddy Jim Parsons, we set up the first ever fully accredited live sound course here in Plymouth, and because that's something that I've always believed in, and I was asked to do it, and I thought, I can't do this on my own. And Jim and I had just been talking about stuff, and he'd moved down here recently from Oxford, and he's also much more technically sort of intelligent than I am. He knows about physics and things like that, and electronics and things.
All that gubbins.
Yeah, all that stuff. But and that's something I'd always kind of felt very passionate about, was being able to kind of give that back. And the result of that course was that there are a lot of people coming off that course and going directly into jobs with us as referees, which seemed to be a very tidy solution. So that kind of the sort of the nurturing, the mentoring of intelligent, enthusiastic people who want to get on has always been something that I've been kind of interested in. And when Jess, descended from the heavens,
Stop it now.
I thought, here's somebody who I can have a right laugh with, but we also get a really good result, and that counts for a lot. And also, and also she's a woman, and we need more women in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And I mean, we've got the team in the US are doing a chat with, I can't remember the name of the organization in the state. I can't think it's called. I want to say Live Girls, but then that sounds absolutely Sound Girls. Thank you. There we go. Yeah. And I don't know. It's something we talked about in the preamble, whether you wanted to talk about this. And it's like, for me, it's one of those things where if we bring it up, then it kind of negates the fact that you're on here in the first place. And it's like,
no, like I said before, it's fine for, like, it doesn't bother me at all. But I must admit, yeah, we do need more women in the industry. Like when I see another lass turn up to a gig, it's like, yeah, another one. Which it shouldn't be, like, really. But for me, I'm just another person doing my job as everybody else is on the show. So,
well, I must say I've been really buoyed by the fact that in the last few days since we announced that you were going to be on this, in the last couple of weeks, I've seen far more women subscribing to our Facebook channel. And good. That just like half a dozen, I think, in the last couple of weeks, which is a massive shift in the percentage kind of thing. Because like I'm always dismayed when we come around to the mixdown time of year, and we're sending out the invites and seeing the RSVPs come in. And for those of you who don't know, the mixdown is an event that Sound Network have been doing for the past 6 years now, I think. Simon has been at every one, maybe.
No, I think certainly 3, if not 4.
Oh, okay, cool. And it's just we get together as many DPA using audio engineers from various parts of the industry as we can and have a good time. And if you've heard about it and you haven't yet been or haven't been invited, please get in touch with us and tell us about how you're using DPAs, and I'll hopefully see you at one. But yeah, it always dismays me that it's such
there's a lot of brilliant women sound engineers out there. I recently worked with a very good one when I was on the Thriller Live tour. We had, when we was over in Germany, we had a PSE turn up with us, Kim Watson. She's from up north as well. Incredible sound engineer, but there's a lot of them out there. Just you don't come across them as much as you do the blokes.
No. And I mean, do you still encounter negative stigma about that stuff?
Yeah, but it's not really. Well, I don't ever see it as negative, but it's when you turn up to a gig and they're like, "Oh, when's the sound guy?" or "When's the techie turning up?" You're like, "Well, I am the techie," and like, "No, but really, no, I actually am." But to be honest, it's few and far between, and you get it everywhere anyway. It shouldn't happen. It really shouldn't happen, but it does, unfortunately. But yeah, no. Other than that, like I said, it's not something that I get irate over or anything like that, because like I said, I'm just doing my job. Have fun, get the job done.
Yeah, indeed, as everyone should. Yeah, but we'll have to get you down to London in January if
sounds good to me.
Anything happens. If anything is still happening in January.
If the world restarts again,
we'll have to rent a hall in the XL and everyone can have a little bubble around them.
The giant
Zorb party.
Yeah. Find a big hill. That sounds like a plan.
Well, look, somehow a whole hour has rolled past. But which feels kind of like I don't know. I feel like we just got started. But we kind of got to wrap things up. But look, we're going to keep doing these as long as this situation keeps on continuing. We've got this audience, which is normally all busy. So maybe we'll do some more group ones and get you guys back on sometime down the line. But for now, thank you everyone for watching, and thank you very, very much, Simon and Jessica for being around and answering our questions and talking about the nature of why, which sounds like a fantastic project. Is that ever coming back? It's kind of a rotating tour, isn't it?
Well, I mean, by the very nature of the beast, obviously social distancing makes it not work very well.
Yeah.
But as soon as people are allowed to hug and embrace, then it'll be back.
Yes.
And definitely, if you could get a chance to get to see it,
It's incredible.
It's incredible. You'll never see anything like it ever.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, if that's your thing. And
I follow you on Grindr, Matt.
Hey, some of my posting on there is really interesting. I think talking about some really interesting topics.
I don't want to see that.
What a great ending.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sam in the office, and Sam North behind the scenes, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Take care.
Thanks a lot. It was great. It was good fun.